cut across the mountainside like glass, each drop hissing on rock and metal. Captain Riley Porter crouched in the mud, fingers tight around his radio. The American voice came through the static, sharp and certain. Light it up. Everything that moves. Above, bombers circled like thunderbirds behind the clouds. Below, a few dim lanterns swayed between the broken houses of the village. He could hear the echo of crying, thin, small, and frightened. Somewhere out there was the enemy, or so they said. Somewhere out there were families who hadn't slept in days. Porter could feel every pair of eyes from his patrol on him. The young ones waited to see what he'd do. The seasoned ones already feared the answer. They'd been awake for 30 hours. Cold, hungry, on orders that could stain their soul. The American liaison officer stood behind him, jittery, radio pressed to his ear. "Captain, they're waiting for your flare. The count's on." His face was pale but determined, like a man following rules instead of outcomes. Porter lifted his field glasses one last time. He saw a courtyard, a bent man struggling with a cane, a small boy dragging a toy truck through the mud. Through those lenses, war lost every excuse it ever claimed. His thumb eased against the flare gun trigger. The color-coded signal meant life or death. One color for obedience, another gesture for conscience. He heard one of his men whisper, "Sir, if we hold fire and those guns hit our boys tomorrow." Porter's breath came shallow. The flares weighed nothing, yet felt like the heaviest thing he'd ever held. Then he raised his hand, not the flare, and said quietly, "No shot." Every man on that hillside froze. Before you judge him, think about it. What would you have done? Would you follow the order, or your gut? Drop your answer in the comments, because tonight, the guns didn't fire, and the story that followed changed everything. And if stories like this make you question what real courage looks like, hit like, subscribe, and hold tight. It's only beginning. Dawn came gray and bitter. The valley below was quiet, untouched. Smoke drifted from cooking fires, not burning homes. American officers climbed the slope fast, boots throwing mud with each furious step. Questions hit harder than bullets. Who overruled the strike? Why the delay? What gave Porter the right? He stood still, soaked to the bone, while the liaison officer kept silent. Someone muttered, "Coward." Another said, "Saboteur." None noticed the trembling hands of the man they were judging. The report would paint him as defiant, maybe even reckless. His men, loyal but shaken, said nothing. They had followed his call. Now they wondered if that silence would follow them home in shame. The radio that night hadn't lied. It had commanded. But conscience had whispered louder. Reputation versus truth. That fight had only begun, and this time, there were no clear sides. 2 weeks before the rain-soaked night, the war had looked almost slow. The forward post sat inside a half-collapsed farmhouse, its roof tarped with canvas that leaked anyway. Mud crept through the doorway. Field maps covered the table, stacked beside half-empty coffee tins. That afternoon, Porter reported to the new American command. Waiting for him was General Douglas Harlan, a tall man, pressed uniform, silver hair untouched by the grime around him. His handshake was firm. His voice carried the weight of a man who never feared being wrong. Rumors said Harlan had senators on speed dial and steel magnates for golfing partners. His temper shared the same edge as his ambition. Outside, soldiers lined up for rations. Between them moved a woman in a Red Cross armband, calm amid the storm. She offered them coffee and a few honest smiles. Her name was Claire Harlan, the general's daughter. Porter noticed how she looked at the wounded, as though the world still had room for mercy. In a place where kindness had gone missing, that single act unsettled him more than enemy fire. And that's how you set the stage for heartbreak, because wars aren't won only by bullets, but by who you dare to care about. The rain was lighter that night, a mist instead of a storm. Porter leaned against a truck, cleaning his rifle, eyes distant. Claire stepped out from the medical tent, wrapping her coat close. For a moment they shared the quiet hum of engines cooling down. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever dream of them? The people on the other end of your maps?" Porter froze. The question cut through every layer of armor he'd built. He forced a laugh, said something about sleeping too hard to dream, but it sounded false even to him. She said nothing more, only looked at him with that unsettling calm. Two people from different worlds, holding the same ache for mercy in a place that rewarded cruelty. That night, when he tried to sleep, the sound of her question filled the darkness. He didn't know it yet, but those words would save lives and cost him nearly everything. Days turned darker. Fog rolled through the hills, and angry orders rolled down from command. The Americans had lost men to hidden guns west of the ridge. General Harlan's face hardened. No delays. No hesitation. Mark every village that sends fire. Porter's unit was pulled into the plan. The Australians were known for precision, but this time the schedule left no margin for thought. Coordinates kept changing, scout reports missed details, and the order sheets were smudged with rain before they dried. When they reached the staging area, Porter spread the maps against a wall. Something in the grid didn't add up. He'd been through enough operations to recognize when haste replaced reason. He told the liaison, "That target's too close to a civilian zone." The reply came curt, "We're out of patience. We hit what's marked." The words hung heavy. For the first time, Porter wondered if loyalty to allies could become disloyalty to himself. He packed his gear in silence that night, listening to the distance between orders and understanding grow wider than the valleys they fought over. Dusk painted the hills with smoke and gold. Porter's team moved through olive groves, stepping between rows slick with rain. They expected patrols, tripwires, or sniper flashes, but what they saw instead stopped them cold. Lanterns glowed faintly through open windows. A woman hung laundry across a fallen beam. Two children chased a stray dog through puddles. The place looked tired, not hostile. Every motion spoke of survival, not ambush. Porter's sergeant lifted his binoculars and whispered, "Intel's off again. We've been burned before." Porter didn't answer. He just watched the woman tie a sheet to dry, as if that simple act were a stand against the war itself. He raised his radio, voice steady but low. Command confirmed visuals. No sign of armed units. Only static replied, thin, uncertain. Behind him, his men waited, unsure whether to believe what they saw or what they'd been told. Somewhere up the ridge, heavy guns clicked into readiness, blind to the small lives below. The sky turned black by the time the order came. Prepare to mark target zone. Porter's hands were numb, not from cold, but from the weight of choice waiting inside them. The American liaison leaned toward him, his voice fast and tense. "Clock's running. They're counting on you to confirm. General Harlan himself wants the go signal." Porter looked down again through his glasses. The village was still, lanterns dim, smoke curling from stoves. Then something caught his eye. A familiar red cross jeep parked beside a small church. His breath hitched. Claire. The starlight barely reached the churchyard, but he could see the pale canvas cover she used on her supply runs. The engine, still warm, had probably drawn no attention yet. She must have been delivering care packages, maybe patching wounds, or trading quiet hope in a place everyone else had given up on. The liaison shouted, "Sir, your flare. Do it now." Seconds stretched. Each heartbeat sounded like thunder. Porter could imagine her walking between houses, her face lit by lantern light, while command above her demanded destruction. He gripped a flare gun. Rain streamed down his helmet. Duty screamed louder than reason. Through the radio, General Harlan's aide barked words full of authority. "Prove your unit's resolve." Porter looked up to the invisible sky, jaw tight. "Not like this," he murmured, and for the second time that month, he chose silence over obedience. A single second redrew the war for everyone on that hillside. The flare gun never rose. Nothing fired. There was only rain and the sound of men forgetting to breathe. Porter's hand trembled, then steadied at his side. His eyes stayed on the village. Below, the gunners waited for the color in the sky that never came. Radios filled with confused chatter. The storm swallowed every word. The liaison officer just stared at him, mouth open, voice gone. "Stand down," Porter said quietly. "Hold it." The thunder rolled close. shaking loose the last doubt in his mind. At the command post, General Harlan slammed his palm on the map table. He failed the test. "That's not command, it's charity." His voice carried through the radio, miles away. Porter couldn't hear every word, but he could feel the fury rise like wildfire. Some wars are fought with bullets. Some start with a single act of refusal. By morning, the word had already spread. Porter's action, the standstill, the refusal. Every headquarters tent whispered one version or another. The official statement came before noon, written by an American NCO Porter had once trusted. It said he ignored signs of enemy movement and delayed the strike without reason. The phrasing was neat, precise, deadly. Reading it hurt worse than the night itself. Betrayal didn't come with shouting. It came with a signature. He sat alone for an hour before giving the paper back. He didn't argue. He didn't write a defense. Silence was all he had left to protect his men from deeper punishment. That night, rain returned. Somewhere across the line, artillery thudded, distant and unmerciful. Porter stared toward the hills and wondered if his small act of mercy had already faded into rumor. By dawn, a field inquiry was called. Judgment would come before breakfast. Truth had no advocate, at least, not yet. Claire heard the accusations before dinner. Her father's headquarters buzzed with talk. Australian captain froze. Lost control. Nearly cost lives. She stood outside his office, listening while the words cut a man she hardly knew, but somehow understood. When the room emptied, she walked in. "You're wrong about him," she said. General Harlan looked up sharply. "You don't understand command." She met his glare without flinching. "Then maybe you don't understand conscience." For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain beat against the windows. The smell of tobacco and ink filled the silence. Finally, he said in a tired voice, "You will not interfere." But Claire had already decided otherwise. That night, she gathered her Jeep keys, strapped on her worn satchel, and slipped out under blackout conditions. The road north led straight into the disputed zone, the same village her father nearly wiped off the map. She wasn't chasing heroism. She was chasing the truth. And deep down, she feared what that truth might cost both of them. Morning light spilled across the valley as American infantry crept toward the village, expecting gunfire. Helmets tilted low, rifles raised, breath drawn thin. Every step echoed caution. But when they entered, silence met them, followed by the faint sound of children crying behind doors. From one doorway, a woman waved a sheet tied to a broom handle. No enemy, no trap, just frightened faces clouded by months of chaos. The soldiers lowered their rifles. Smoke rose from cook fires, not weapons. Then came the real shock, Claire's Red Cross Jeep rolling through the square. Mud caked the tires. She stumbled out with bandage rolls and tins of food. "They've been hiding, not fighting," she said, kneeling beside an old man gripping his chest. In the bell tower above, a priest clutched a broken field radio. Rusted, powerless, a relic mistaken for danger. The enemy signal command had traced back here. The troops looked around, faces pale with the truth. It wasn't the Germans they'd come close to killing. It was fear itself, fed by orders, multiplied by the distance between command and conscience. The discovery spread faster than expected, even in silence. No official broadcast, no press release. Just murmurs in tent corridors and mess lines. The story grew in whispers. The Australians had held fire, and the village had lived. The NCO who filed the report couldn't eat that evening. Later that night, he edited his statement under a lantern's glow, adding the words he should have written the first time. He'd misread the signals, been rushed, pressured. Porter's name returned to the command rolls without ceremony. No handshake, no medal, no speech. Only the quiet nod from a clerk sliding a folder across the desk. General Harlan read the revision in private. The paper trembled slightly in his hand before he placed it face down on the table. He didn't call Porter, didn't apologize, but in the stillness after, the truth hovered like a burden too late to share. Justice came without applause, but it came. That night, Porter sat outside the farmhouse, watching the storm move east. His rifle lay across his knees, untouched. He wasn't thinking about medals or punishment now. He was thinking about right and wrong, and how the line between them shifted and wore like sand in the wind. When Claire stepped out, she didn't speak at first. She just sat down beside him. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. He said finally, "What if next time hesitation gets people killed? What if I made the wrong call?" She looked ahead, voice calm. "Maybe. Or maybe you reminded people what judgment is supposed to feel like." He turned toward her, eyes tired. "I don't trust my choices anymore." "Good," she said softly. "It means you're still human." Her words landed deeper than comfort. They sounded like truth, trying to survive the noise of war. In that moment, he found no peace, but he found purpose. Sometimes that's enough. A week later, new directives rolled down from command. All civilian strike zones required direct confirmation. The message came stamped with General Harlan's own signature. He summoned Porter to a small tent. No aides, no crowd. The air held the weight of things neither man wanted to say. "You'll brief my officers," Harlan said. "Explain how we do things now." His tone was measured, almost restrained. Porter studied him, then nodded once. The two men shook hands, an uneasy peace between pride and acknowledgement. Later, when Porter stood before the gathered officers, every face was silent. Some looked ashamed, others curious, but all listened. Behind policy and power stood one simple truth. Mercy didn't weaken command, it defined it. Winter gave way to February winds as Porter's patrol rolled north toward Bologna. The land was torn and raw, but hope returned in small ways. Villages rebuilding, roads clearing, laughter creeping back into tired voices. Claire stayed behind at the aid station, her sleeves stained with iodine and ink. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't have to. At dusk, the convoy halted on a ridge. Over the radio, a young pilot's voice barked a familiar phrase. "Light it up." Porter paused, staring toward the hills glowing orange in the setting sun. His fingers brushed the cold metal of his binoculars. "Not every order deserves to be obeyed," he whispered. "And that's how wars sometimes change, not through victory, but through one man's refusal to forget the value of a single human life." Fade out with a promise. The next story begins thousands of miles west, under training skies painted with doubt.